Okay, my name is Milton Higgins. I'm 67 years old as of July 13th. I was born in Lexington, Virginia, one of 7 boys born into the Higgins family, and I guess I was number 2. Probably my earliest memory, we lived on Henry Street in Lexington in an apartment on the 2nd floor. We lived above a convenience grocery corner store. I think it was called McCamey's Grocery, and we would go down there quite a bit to look at the candy in the jars and whatnot. Also, was a little bit of a daredevil when I lived there with my parents, and they had a little hill out back, and I would love to ride my tricycle with my feet on the handlebars and say, "Look at me," and I would ride down the hill and crash into a cinder block wall. So I guess that could explain a lot about me right there, as a little bit of a daredevil. My mother's name is Jane Harris, who married Curtis Fremont Higgins. And parents wanted a daughter, and they had a name picked out, Madonna Diane, before Madonna made the name famous. And they never had a girl, so they kept having boys. And they named us all with M's. Monty was named after my dad, who is Curtis Fremont Higgins, and that made him Curtis Fremont Higgins Jr., and they nicknamed him Monty off of Fremont. So then along came Milton, and I always wondered, I guess they were new at picking M's, and Milton wasn't near as cool as Malcolm and some of the later M's that came along. But my 3rd brother was Michael Stanley, and then 4th brother was Mark Winston. Unfortunately, he died of hydrocephalus at the age of about less than a year old. So I just barely remember him and how Mom had to just hold him all the time. After Mark was born and passed, my brother Manley was born, about 4 years between him and my brother Mike. And then the brother after Manley was Matthew, and then my youngest brother, Malcolm David Higgins. So we had quite a good time playing, as you can imagine. We were poor and we didn't know it. We thought that was normal, being that way. We actually moved to the country my first year in school. There was nothing like kindergarten. You just went straight to the 1st grade. And the elementary school was 1st through 7th, Highland Bell Elementary School, down off Route 60 west of Lexington, about 4.5 miles. And we moved next door to some land my grandfather, my dad's father, James Edward Higgins, gave my father. And he built a house there for us. And we ended up having 2 bedrooms and 1 bath. It was a nice brick home, though. The basement and the upstairs were for future expansion that really never got expanded. So I guess never got the funds or whatever to finish it off. But we all lived there and had a happy childhood. We played games probably nobody's heard of because we made them up. Even our card games we played as a family and friends was called 52. And not too many people know of it or have ever played it because it probably came out of Higgins Hollow, which was the place where my ancestors came from, off of House Mountain, foot of House Mountain. They took some land that nobody else would farm. And my grandfather moved down to where he was, and he had cows and chickens and a plow horse, and he was a working farmer. He never learned to read or write, so I remember him signing things with an X instead of his name. He was a World War II veteran and got wounded and had a Purple Heart. But when the Great Depression came through, he had lost a significant amount of the land he had, and he learned to survive in hard times, sort of like we're going through with the pandemic right now. He survived. He learned to build a garden. We had a garden that was almost as big as a football field, and we would work it after the workhorse died. My dad came along. He used us, his 6 sons, to pull the plow. And I remember he would put me in the middle because I was the tallest and biggest, and I had to keep one hand on either side of the chain behind us and make sure I stayed straight and steady. And my dad would hold the plow and had a big rock he would set on it to hold it in the ground. So I guess as a kid, we've we found working was normal and was fun, so it taught me a good work ethic, and I think that's important in life. Got me through college on my own, paying my own way. It taught me to appreciate things in life. And the games that we played were like stick horses made out of my grandfather's bean poles. We'd tie a piece of hay twine string to it, and we'd reenact the Lone Ranger or Gene Autry or all those westerns that were really popular back then. That was before Batman and all the action heroes came along. As far as other qualities they instilled in me, I guess they were a Christian family. We went to church pretty much every time the doors were open. It was a little small country church, Ebenezer, and it was Associate Reformed Presbyterian, or an ARP, I guess you could call us. And we went to church on Wednesday night prayer meetings. We went on Sunday morning for Sunday school. Then we went to the church service. We had a youth group that met on Sunday afternoons or evenings, and we went to that. So had a lot of coming up in the church, and that gave me a strong faith, and that's another quality that's really helped me in my life is being able to rely on God, being able to rely on leaning on Him, knowing He was always there even in the toughest of times. And prayer life was important because prayer meetings, you were there, and the musician didn't even show up. We'd sing a cappella. And sometimes they would ask me to lead because there weren't a lot of great voices with the small numbers that we had, but we did have a choir, and we would travel around from church to church for hymn sings. So some of those old hymns still stick in my head, and I can remember the words 50 years later. It's amazing how that kind of hides God's Word in your heart with a song. So I highly encourage singing as a way of learning God's Word. Music was a big thing in my life. I played the trumpet. I learned to play the trumpet like the 5th grade. I went on to play the baritone in the Lexington High School band. We went to Lexington High School from the 7th grade. And I remember the 8th grade year going to Lexington for the first time, and I couldn't wait to go to school with some of the people I'd played in the county band with. And they sent us to the black high school right there in Lexington. For the first year they integrated the schools, and they had all the white 8th graders go to the black high school for 8th grade along with the black students, and we had mostly black staff and faculty and coaches there. And in the Lexington white high school was 9th through 12th grades, and they integrated those grades at that school. So that one year I was playing in the Lilburn Downing band that was named evidently after a pastor there in Lexington that was a pretty famous guy, and I understand he had a lot to do with the Stonewall Jackson Cemetery and putting a monuments there because they were appreciative that he taught and tutored some of the black students even when the times didn't allow it. He would go against what they were supposed to do and helped educate them. So a lot of history in Lexington, as of course with the Robert E. Lee coming there after the Civil War and being the president of what was originally a college started by George Washington. So it was the Washington College became Washington and Lee University. And after high school, I became a freshman there at Washington and Lee. They had a great deal for local students. You could come and pay what they call it. They got a Rockbridge County grant by the county, and I was paying $300-400 a semester plus buying my books. And I worked for the university all 4 years and even a year beyond my college education. I got an undergraduate degree in business. I minored in journalism. I always thought I wanted to be a DJ on the radio, and then I started looking into what DJs made and decided I better switch my major to business, and I did that my junior year. So I played baseball for Washington and Lee, and I was in athletics all my life. Really enjoyed sports. My brothers, we played Little League Baseball. At that point, we lived in the country, and we had to hitchhike sometimes to our games. People wouldn't let their 10 to 12-year-old kids do that these days, I'm sure, but a lot of times my aunt, who lived next door with my dad's dad, she would take us to the game, or my cousin, first cousin, my aunt's daughter, she would take us to some games. And of course, Mom had to work most of the time, and Dad was away. He traveled a lot with his insurance sales job. So we loved to play. We were pretty good athletes. And the Little League football that I played at the time, we had 4 teams. And one was the Baltimore Colts, and that was me. And one was the Washington Redskins, and that was my brother Monty. And my brother Mike, he played with me on the Colts. So we would watch our little black and white TV and see the NFL. Dallas Cowboys usually were on, playing on Sundays, and then we'd go out at halftime and after the game, and we'd reenact everything we saw on TV over in what was called Phoebe's Bottom. Our Aunt Phoebe, who was really my dad's dad, my grandfather Higgins, it was his sister, and she owned a house across the road, and she had a big field that was not planted as a garden or anything else, and it had I guess you'd call it a hollow or a ditch, big, large drainage area. Water would run down and come around there when it stormed. But we played on that field, and you had to be really good not to step in the hollow when you're chasing a fly ball or you were running for a touchdown or whatever sport we were playing in Phoebe's Bottom. So the neighbors' kids, the Trussels, Ricky and Donnie and Stanley, they played with us. And I remember one time my grandmother, we had to order water because we had water coming off the roof, and if it didn't rain, you had to fill up your cistern with water, so a water truck would come from town and fill up your cistern. So we did that one time, and guess what? The wooden bridge across that same hollow that extended up by my grandparents' place gave way, and the weight of the water truck caused it to just, the rear of the truck went down and the headlights came up and they were stuck in the hollow. And we had one big basketball and football game up in the barnyard that day because a lot of people stopped and were like, wow, look at that truck sitting in the hollow. What a deal, you know. So it didn't take much for us to entertain ourselves. We would take things like old rubber tires and cut them into strips, and then we would tie it in a loop on the end, and then tie another knot, and then another knot, and another knot, and then you would grab the end and stretch it, and you could shoot it off of the end of your thumb. So we would run around the house and shoot. You can make them shoot all the way from one corner to the other and make it sting a little. So we didn't buy a lot of toys. We just pretty much made up games like that and enjoyed them. Hide and seek. At night, I was famous for staying out last, and nobody would come find me because it got too dark. But that was part of the daredevil in me, I guess. But we had a great time as my brothers, great time with the neighbors, and it was just a different time than it is today. But I'm glad I was born when I was born. Part of not knowing we were poor and why we were so close as brothers with the 2 bedrooms, of course my parents had 1 bedroom, and all of us had the other bedroom. And we had one standard full-size bed that 3 of us slept in. And we used to joke about, I got to go home early tonight with my friends because it's my night to sleep against the wall, so I got to be the first one in bed. Things like that. But we would joke about it, but we really didn't mind it because I guess it taught us the values, important things in life for family, your faith, and just getting along in those kinds of quarters. It was pretty good that we could get along and all sleep in the same room. But I'm sure we drove our parents nuts sometimes trying to stay up, especially if we had a friend stay over and finding a place for them to sleep. And I remember my next to youngest brother, Matthew, had developed asthma, and it was the first time I'd ever seen anybody with asthma, and he was and I was like, I don't know what's going on. So I was able to drive at that point, and I drove him to the hospital because I didn't know what was going on. And after that, the doctor said, you can't sleep in the room with all those people. You need to get up and get some space. So he moved out to the living room and the sofa, and it wasn't a sleeper sofa, but he slept on it. He used to brag to his friends and stuff, I've got my own room with my own TV and my own stereo. Pretty much it was the family. You only had one TV and you only had one stereo, and it was usually a big wooden cabinet console, they called it, with a record player in one end and you stored your records in the other, and it was just a big piece of furniture. But that's where I learned to like music as well, and I remember buying my first 45 at Rose's Five and Dime in Lexington, and I could go over there and take my $5 I got for Christmas and shop for every member of the family at Rose's, and Newberry's was another dime store on the other block. So you could walk around and shop and get all your shopping done with $5, and you were done within an hour. So, but my mother, when she worked at Sears, starting out as a floor on the retail catalog sales, Sears and Roebuck catalog, my mother lived it, because she would order all of our Christmas stuff from it, and you would look at it. And we used to joke, because when we were done with last year's catalog, you took it up to my grandfather's, because he didn't have indoor plumbing, and he had an outdoor John. And so you would put the Sears and Roebuck catalog in, and when it was getting down to where you were desperate and you needed to take care of business, you had to, hopefully something other than a glossy page ad from the catalog. You still had some paper ones, but it's just that kind of stuff with no plumbing and having to use a chamber pot when we went to stay with my grandmother, and we slept upstairs with no heat, and you had to run and get under the covers, and you could see your breath in the air. And in the wintertime, that's the way we came up. But we were blessed, very close family, lots of Higgins reunions, lots of Sunday afternoons under the big walnut shade tree with the lawn chairs, and the uncles and the aunts would come with all my cousins, and we just had a good time as a youth. So as far as my mother's side goes, I told you her name was Jane Helen Harris. She unfortunately was killed in an auto accident in 1987, born in 1931, so she was 56, and she had come to see my brother Mike in Manassas, Virginia, and she had also brought her retirement papers along, because she was thinking about retiring from Sears, because she was living with her mother, Ethel Harris, after she and my dad split and divorced. So for the last 4 years of my grandmother Ethel Harris's life, my mom lived with her in Buena Vista, Virginia, in a very small, another 2-bedroom house that we visited quite often. But with my grandfather Harris, my mom's dad's name was Roy Harris. He had died relatively early when I was a child, and I think he worked in a carpet factory, but he worked in the area that worked with files and sharpening tools and whatnot. And evidently the filings from those files eventually got into his lungs, and he died from that. But after my mother moved in with my grandmother, when she passed, my mom was thinking seriously about moving up with us. So that's why she had come to Manassas that weekend, as well as my youngest brother, Malcolm, graduating from George Mason University there in Fairfax, Virginia. So on the day before the graduation, she went out with my brother Mike's wife, Vicki, and their daughter, Miranda, who was 2. And Mom was in the back seat, and Miranda was in the front in a car seat, and that was before they changed the guidelines to put them in the back. And they were delivering some papers for my sister-in-law's work, Vicky's work, and on their way back, a truck lost control, and I guess it was a boom truck, they called it, that hauled cinder blocks, and it got on the guardrail, and there was a head-on collision on a 2-lane road with nowhere to go. And then a second truck, a pizza delivery truck, also came along and collided into those vehicles. And there was a cement truck behind them, and that driver of the cement truck was killed. So it was a real tragic time. I was working for General Electric at the time, and I'll never forget, I was just like in shock, I guess, trying to think that's got to be a mistake when they called and told me that my mother had been killed. And I was riding a train to work, and I just grabbed what I had and went down to the train station, was pacing on the platform, and not even thinking about there being no train for the next 5 hours. So one of my best friends that had not been a friend then was my boss, Mike Yorty. Actually, he wasn't my boss at the time. Came down to the train station and said, there's no train coming. Why don't you come with me? And he took me home. My mother was killed instantly, and Miranda. And then Vicky lived for about 30 days, but she never came out of her coma. So my brother Mike then was left with his son Micah. So that was one of the most tragic moments in my life. I guess if you would say it taught me anything, it's taught me how to lean on my faith. We didn't blame God. We didn't try to, get angry at God. Although my brother Mike, if anybody, losing his mother, wife, and daughter, could have, but he's been a very strong Christian influence even today, and used that terrible tragedy to being a testimony and strengthening other people, encouraging people that have had those kind of tragedies in their lives. So my mom, Jane Harris, she graduated from Buena Vista High School and was a drummer, which was kind of a leading edge for ladies at the time. There weren't many of them playing drums. My father, Fremont, playing the guitar, he played in some bands that did local dances and stuff there. He actually made some records on 78s. Nobody probably knows what those were, but they were smaller than a 33 RPM record, and he actually made those somehow and would have his voice, and he recorded even us singing as kids on the machine he used to create those records. So I learned to play the guitar, self-taught, wrote some songs with the guitar, and that's one of my regrets in life. I have kind of two regrets. One was not keeping up with my music. We did start a quartet with two of my brothers and my cousin. She played the piano, and we traveled around and we harmonized and blended so well, and everybody wanted to hear the Higgins boys, and a lot of people called us Jane's boys or Fremont's boys. Everybody still thinks of us as their boys, even when we go back as grown adults today. But that was something I didn't keep up with and keep going. I wish I had continued with it. I still love to sing. I did play in a praise and worship band for about 6 months, and I really enjoyed that. I don't feel I'm musically accomplished enough. I'm 3 chords, praise the Lord, which is, you can pretty much play any song with 3 chords. At least Christian songs anyway. But the other regret I had was in the sports area, and I went back for a big reunion for the white football coach, and I think he did several other sports as well. He started the Little League football in Lexington when I was young, and I became the quarterback of the Colts team by having Coach Fox's son, who was the original quarterback, either broke or badly sprained his finger on his passing hand the first game of the season. So he let me move in from halfback to quarterback because I liked to quarterback all in Phoebe's Bottom, and we had our games. I would be a quarterback all the time. So I was good at it, and so good at it, I guess, that I kept winning. And Coach Fox's son, after 2 games of sitting on the bench, he said, "Dad, my finger's fine, my finger's fine." And I really admire Mr. Fox for never taking me out to play his son over me. He let me continue to play, and we went undefeated. And since we were undefeated, they said, well, we really can't have a playoff because you guys are pretty much winning all the games. And I had a lot of great players playing with me, both the Fox boys, the twins. I had both the Maharises. They were twins, and they were really fast. I had my brother Mike. We just had a super team, and we're very blessed. And my brother Monty, 1 year older than me, he quarterbacked the Redskins, and he was thinking, hey, I got to beat my brother, and they couldn't. So after the end of the season, they came the closest to beating us. They let him quarterback an all-star team of all 3 teams, and we beat them. And I remember running for a touchdown and had my jersey completely ripped off my back on that game. And I think Coach Brubaker at the White High School at the time had been the referee for those games, and he saw all that. And when I went to the high school for the first year, and there was a black coach, Coach Madison, Dave Madison, and I started out playing basketball for him. And we were practicing one day, and it was the first day of hunting season, and November was coming up. And every year, first day, Monday of hunting season, my dad would take me and my brothers, and we would go hunting. So I just went into the coach's office after practice and said, I'm going to go hunting on Monday. I just want to let you know I won't be at practice. He said, hunting? We don't hunt here. And I'm like, well, I'm going. And he said, well, if you're going to go hunting, he said, you might as well turn your uniform in. And he said, you're going to miss practice. I was like, so I just stripped off right down to what was known as a jock strap. I don't know if they still wear them, but everything else belonged to them. The black jock strap belonged to me. So I walked out of his office with the jock strap on and said, I'm going hunting. And I regretted that later on because he moved to the high school the next year along with me and became the JV football coach. So then I felt like I couldn't play for him because we had this rift between us. So I didn't play football, and that was a regret I had. And I was in PE, phys ed, and we had driver's ed was part of that physical education program, and Coach Brubaker was teaching that class, and he walked around when we were having a test one day and came to my desk and stood over me and said, which one of you Higgins boys coached the Baltimore Colts in the Little League? I said, that was me. And he said, why aren't you playing football? Well, I didn't feel like I could tell him the real reason that I had this thing going on with Mr. Madison, because at that point he was assisting with the varsity team and head coaching the JV junior varsity. So I just said, well, I play baseball and I have to work the rest of the time, which I did. I played baseball. It was the only sport that Coach Madison didn't have anything to do with. He helped with track and he helped with football. So I went to that big reunion later on. They had it at Washington Lee University, and all these high school classes came together to honor Coach Brubaker. He had retired and was getting up in years, and they had a big book to sign for him, and I wrote out my regret in there and told him that was the only regret I had with never getting to play football for him, because he was a very good coach. I was still in Lexington at the time, living at home while I went to school, which most everybody else was in the freshman dorms or renting a room at a frat house, fraternity house, or staying with an apartment with other guys in town or whatever. But since I was going in my hometown and I got the Rockbridge County grant, which made it very affordable, I went to school there and stayed at home. So then I got a job the summer before I started college at the Washington and Lee Building and Grounds crew, better known as the Bull Gang. And we did all the lawns, we trimmed all the bushes, got up the leaves, mowing, you name it, moving professors, moving the president of the college, whatever they needed us to do. And they also had paint crews and plumbing crews and electrical crews, and we all were in the maintenance facility building. And I worked my way through college. I worked 40 hours a week while I went to school full time and paid every penny of my tuition and expenses on my own. So, and I thought I was making big money, making $5,000 a year, I guess, working full time there. And I graduated from W&L, give them hell, W&L, in 1975. I was the first person to graduate in my family from college. My brother Monty started before me, but then he ended up getting married and dropping out and then coming back and finishing a year later than me. When I graduated in 1975, I'm like, well, what do I do now? So I began applying for jobs, and I kept working at the university for almost a year, and I finally took the professional and career exam, the PACE exam, to get into the federal government. I had a cousin, Ralph Hostetter, who had moved up there and worked for General Services Administration in D.C., so I thought I would take that test and see how I did, and I did very well, and I ended up getting a 90-day appointment. It wasn't a full-time job because at that point, I think it was an election year, and they had put a freeze on, and they weren't hiring anybody, but they were bringing in temporaries. So I came in on a 90-day appointment for General Services Administration in 1976, and I was there until I went to General Electric in 1983. I was there about 7.5 years, I think. And I'd met someone on the van pool. I commuted in a van from Manassas, Virginia, because soon after moving up there and leaving home, being the first of the brothers, of their sons, to go to college and then first to graduate and first to leave home, I got an apartment at Bailey's Crossroads where my cousin Ralph Hostetter managed the apartments there. And I became a transition house for all the other brothers who wanted to leave home. And I had my brother Manley move up first, and I was in an efficiency apartment that he moved into me with because we were kind of used to being in one room together anyway. He had decided he wanted to come up that way and get a different start. So he stayed with me, and I saved a job for him at the apartments as the handyman. And then my brother Mike soon followed him. And in 1978, I moved out of the apartments into my first home I purchased out in Manassas, Virginia. And that was quite a commute. So the van pooling and stuff to my job at GSA was kind of required on a starting salary, because I remember my starting salary at GSA was $8,900, I think. So I'm almost went from 5,000 to almost 9,000. I said, man, I really got a big raise. I got that first house as a townhouse, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath townhouse. I think it was maybe 1.5 bath, if I remember, 2-level. And I moved there in 1978 and stayed there until 1983. But as I said, I got in a van pool that ended up leading me to a lady who was a HR person at GE, so I gave her my resume. And I had gotten married for the first time. I remember priding myself on thinking I was going to wait till I was 30 to get married, and I was 29 and almost a month away from being 30 before I got married the first time to Carol Skowronski, nice Polish family down in Little Washington, Virginia. I had met her at a restaurant in Lexington, Virginia, when I was home with one of my roommates from the Northern Virginia area in Lexington at Spanky's. She was a waitress there, and we ended up dating and going to a VMI, Virginia Military Institute football game. And I met her brother, who was going to school there at the time, Peter Skowronski. He was going to Virginia Military Institute. And I actually came back to Northern Virginia and had really not heard or spoken to or seen. We just kind of went on that one. I met her at the game, so it was kind of a date, I guess. And then she called me and said she remembered me, and I was at the townhouse in Manassas, and she wanted to go out. And she had actually been to Florida, I guess, at that point, and had been married since the last time I'd seen her, and divorced, and had a son, Nathan, and he was an infant, just starting to walk. But by the time we met and got married in June of 1982, I adopted Nathan as my son, and we set up house in my townhouse I had there in Manassas for about a year. And then I got that job that the lady took my resume to GE, and I became General Electric Information Services employee in 1983. So we had to move. That was quite a commute. It was all the way over to Rockville, Maryland, and I lived all the way out in Manassas, Virginia. So I looked into a commuter train as a way to possibly get to my new employment in Brunswick, Maryland, and looked at a house, and lo and behold, the realtor took us by on the way to see the home softball field. And I had been heavily involved in softball, been to many state tournaments, played with Technotrucks in Fairfax the year I got married, and they went to the Worlds and won the World Championship. But I had to make a decision whether I was going to get married or play softball. because the priest that we were supposed to meet with, Episcopal priest down in Little Washington, said, "Are you going to play softball or are you going to get married?" So I had to think about it a while because I was playing quite a bit. I played every weekend. I played multiple leagues at one point in Herndon and in Alexandria, and I had gotten on this really competitive, great team and had a chance to win the World Championships. But I ended up deciding to get married instead, and I had to drop off the team, and they ultimately won the World that year. But got a lot of injuries to show for all my softball accolades and a lot of trophies that I finally threw away when I downsized a few years back. But after that marriage, I had 3 children, with Nathan being adopted. I had Laura, my daughter, born in 1984. And then this was good college planning, I thought, on my part. And Nathan was 1980, Laura 1984. And I had Adam Winston Higgins, named after my brother who died, Mark Winston. He was born in 1988. And at that point, 1987 was when my mother had her car accident. She was coming to my house to talk about retirement as we had moved into a new home. The only home I ever had built and moved into as brand new was at Jaybird Court, just outside of Brunswick, and my children attended schools in Brunswick. So then in 1988, I guess, or 87, was when the accident was. 1997, my wife and I separated at that point. I sold the home at Jaybird and I moved into several rentals while I proceeded through my divorce for 6 years. I ended up finally getting to the point where I could buy a home in Jefferson after living on a farm with my boss at the time, Michael Yorty. He had like 300 acres and an old 1770s wide plank floor. It was a really neat home. It had spring water coming right into the tap, and I lived there until the divorce was kind of finalizing, and then I moved back and bought the home in Jefferson, Maryland. And that was the dream home I always wanted, with all brick, no more siding, aluminum siding or vinyl siding. And it had a 2.5 oversized garage with a nice backyard and a fire pit. And it was just a really nice place, and I spent a lot of time with Adam there. We also had a home at Deep Creek Lake that I'd purchased with my brothers upon my mother's death near Oakland, Maryland, the panhandle of Maryland, where the Virginia tip goes up, and you go up and over the tip to the largest lake in Maryland, 60-some miles of shoreline. And I just kind of picked the place for my brothers because with my mother being deceased, we had no place to meet for the holidays and to get together, and we wanted to kind of keep the closeness of the brothers intact. So we bought this 6-bedroom home up there together as a joint effort, and we could do skiing in the winter because they had a ski resort there called the Wisp, and they had this lake for the summer to boat on. And I wanted to teach my kids to do all the things I was never able to do as a child, which is learn to ski, learn to water ski or tube on the lake. It was just a lot of fun times up there. They had a nice swimming pool, indoor heated swimming pool, and our house was right near the clubhouse. You could shoot billiards. They had a playground there. It was just a good place, and you could go golf cart riding in the evening and see 50 to 100 deer at a time. Even had an albino white deer up there. Just a beautiful place. It was always 10 degrees cooler than it was in the D.C., Northern Virginia area, so it was a nice place to cool off in the summer. But then the divorce was final, and I moved into the Jefferson home. I ended up pretty much focusing on Adam and doing fun things with him, going to Deep Creek. And the older 2 children kind of went off and got married and had children of their own. And then I met my second wife, Jacqueline Jones, and I guess she was Jacqueline Partridge because she was a remarriage as well because her husband had died from alcoholism. So we met at the Holiday Inn adult monthly dance. I think they may have even had 2 a month, maybe it was 1. But I didn't go that often, but I went on a Sunday evening, they had it, and it was a big ballroom, and It was just a nice, safe environment. You didn't have to go to a bar or something like that. It was just a way for single adults to meet. And Jackie was there, and I guess one of the lessons I learned from my first marriage is, the Bible talks about being equally yoked, being of the same faith, I think is very important. And so you learn from your mistakes. That's why I guess there's 50% divorces. Most times people don't get married for the right reasons or don't think about all the reasons they should be getting married, and faith is very important to me. So second time around, first dance I had with Jackie, I asked her the question, to her dismay, was, where do you go to church? And I was determined that I was going to find somebody who was a God-fearing woman and would, really live what I felt like a practicing Christian, where you go to church on Sundays and you read the Bible and you pray together and you stay together. And a lot of these cliches that I heard coming up from my grandparents, like the whole work ethic thing of making sure that if you're going to start a job, you finish it. And if you're going to do a job, you should do it right. And pay as you go, don't use credit. All those lessons I learned early, I wanted to make sure that was going to be something that the second marriage had built around it. Somebody I could count on to want to go to church with me and want to read God's Word with me and want to have devotions with me and want to be able to pray together about whatever's going on in our lives. So God brought Jackie into my life, no question about it, and she knows the same from her perspective, that it was a divine appointment. And we got married in 2008. I proposed to her in the Jefferson home in front of my fireplace, the hearth, and I had my kids over for Christmas and decided that's when I was going to pop the question. And I had bought her a spinner Irish ring because she was of Irish origin from Tipperary, and my family, the Higgins family, came from Ireland in the Galway area. So we always laughed. My brother tells the jokes to some of his Irish friends who came over after the potato famine that the Higginses were really smart because we came before the potato famine. But we still love our potatoes today. I talked about pulling the plow, and we planted potatoes, and then we had to pull the plow to pull the potatoes out of the ground and harvest the potatoes. We're a big Irish family and proud of it. As far as the second marriage goes, it's been a big blessing for me. We've been very blessed from a standpoint of grandchildren. Jackie and I have had 4 grandkids in the last 4 years, which is kind of amazing. We thought 5 years ago we weren't going to have any more grandchildren. I have 2 by my first marriage. Nathan has a son, Trent, and he just graduated from high school last year and getting ready to go in the military. And my daughter, Laura, had a son, Ryden, and he's very gifted as well. He's been attending school in Frederick, Maryland, and had very good grades and accomplishments. So I'm looking forward to see what the 2 of them do with the rest of their lives. And I'm also looking forward to spending a lot of time with our smaller grandchildren, new grandchildren. I just spent 2 days at a Disney resort yesterday with my grandchildren from Florida. I have 2 over in Palm Harbor, Florida, and that's Clark and Bobby, and they're children of Jackie's oldest child, Eric Partridge, and that's the Partridge family. And then she's got a daughter, Tori, who married Matthew Sharp, and they've blessed us with 2 granddaughters, the oldest being Audrey at 4 years old, and we have Elise at the age of 2. So just got lots of grandchildren time, and as this epidemic or pandemic, COVID-19 has really put a little bit of a cramp on our grandparenting time and time together. But we had bought a place here in Florida in 2019, so we could be near my son Adam, who moved down here in 2014 time frame, and then our grandson's over in Palm Harbor. Tori lives in Maryland. I really think my faith is one of the biggest things in my life, and being honest is a very important value, and I try to instill that in all my children and grandchildren to make sure they always tell the truth. Your word is your bond, as my grandfather used to say, and He was he did his deals on a handshake and putting an X on the line. He didn't need to have it in writing like you do today. So I think that, and the fact that he taught me a good work ethic. My dad as well, very hardworking, clearing the land that we had that we built our house on, to gardening, to starting a strawberry patch business to sell strawberries. Knew hard work all my life, and it helped me secure the job with General Service Administration after college, and I had to work my way through college. So all those early lessons are a big part of who I am and my heritage. And coming out of Higgins Holler, I remember when Jackie and I got married, she thought she was trying to tell me she was a country girl and was had some rough upbringing. And then I said, you don't know what poor is. I said, I'm going to take you up to Higgins Hollow, which is where we came from. And she thought I was joking, but they had actually put the road signs in for the paramedics that year, and they had a sign, and it was a dirt road, of course, all the way back there, no hard pavement. So I made a believer out of her that I was poorer and I was more country than she was. So now she lets me talk about being country because I have the experience and lived it. But wouldn't have had it any other way. It made me who I am. After I left GE in 1996, I went to work for Bell Atlantic, and then it became Verizon when it merged. And I actually moved from Verizon when I lost my job there in 2004. They ended up moving the jobs to Texas because it was cheaper there to have techs work there than in the DC area, which was a higher income area. So I just, at that point, had a feeling that God wanted me to do more for Him and less for me. And up until that point, I thought I was living a Christian life, but I was only trying to accomplish what Milt had in his plans, which was getting his kids through college and having a home paid off by the time I was 50, and early retirement. And when that plan all fell apart, and I ended up divorced and no job, I said, okay, God, I hear you. I'm surrendering. And when you're flat on your back, you can only reach up sometimes. So that put me in a position where I really had to get into God's Word. I was going to men's group at church, and they told me at the Eisenhower Resort, when I was still working at Verizon, and I knew all this pressure was on me. We just had a 30% cut in staff, and I was managing twice the people I had before. It was just incredible stress most of the time, and constantly in fear of losing your job and losing your income. And at my age, I knew I would never be able to get back to that income. So we were doing a men's conference that weekend at the Eisenhower Center, and the study book we were using was called "If You Want to Walk on Water, You Got to Get Out of the Boat." And then that study, when we would break out with the men in my small group that we had out at the resort, they said, Milt, it sounds like you're kind of paralyzed and can't do what God's purpose is for your life because you are afraid of losing your job, and it's got you kind of hand-tied. So I took a leap of faith when taking my severance from Verizon, and I had gone 6 months looking for a job, and everybody was telling me I was too old, or as they put it, too experienced for the job. They didn't want to hire somebody at my age and have to train them and invest in them only to be there for a few years. So I went to work. God called me. I said, okay, God, what is it? If I'm serving you, but I'm not serving others, which were the two greatest commandments, I said, how can I serve you more? And so I went in and joined a small men's group that was getting together and reading Bonhoeffer's, can't even remember the name of the book now because I'm not really a big reader. I read a lot of technical stuff, but then I'm not really interested in reading for entertainment or leisure. I was really not getting into that book study, and it was kind of high-level, theoretical, spiritual stuff. And I said, can't we do something as a men's group and go around, say, and ask them for the cards that they turn in at church, and people want people to come in and serve them, whether it's bring them things or just go pray with them or whatever. they didn't want to. Yeah, I said, nah, I think I want to keep this group the way I've got it, and blah blah blah. So I was like, okay, I'll go to this other group, and they said, well, it says, why don't you take the lead on that? They said, so I did. I went to a meeting at the church office, and the associate pastor, Ken, said, I'm going to, as Frederick Christian Fellowship I was attending at the time, he said, well, this assessment, I'll give you a work assessment, and says, the results say you should be a chef. And I'm like, you got the wrong information. Somebody must have swapped my results with theirs, because I said, I don't cook, I said, I know how to microwave, but I don't cook. And he got me to thinking, of what things I could do to serve others. And wouldn't you know it, the church secretary there at the time, she said, aren't you looking for a job? I said, yeah. She says, well, our pastor just went over to meet with the Religious Coalition. And she said, they have a position open for director of their homeless shelter, and they're looking for somebody to hire. So I had my resumes and stuff in the car because I was still looking for work. And sure enough, I went over there, and they were having a board meeting. And I just said, can you make sure they get this resume? Because it was evidently the last day you could apply. And so then they called me in for an interview, and the board was meeting, and I went in and I just prayed about it. And it was funny because the guy who was at the previous church I'd attended at Trinity United Methodist was there to be interviewed the same day I was. And I knew him, and he was like, he turned around and said, I might as well leave if you're here. I said, no, I was going to say the same thing. You got this job. And we joked around, but then I went down for the interview, and it was just a God thing. I just talked about how me and my brothers used to, he said, what would you do if you had a conflict and a fight broke out or whatever? I said, well, my brothers and I used to watch Bonanza. It was one of like 2 channels we got in black and white. And I said, on Sunday nights, we watched Bonanza, and once the commercial came on, we would reenact the scene right there in the floor, wrestling and fighting, and I would be Hoss and whatever. And they just thought it was funny and laughed, and I went through the interview, and they hired me. But it was a big, humbling experience, but God wanted me there, and I knew it was God's calling on my life to go serve these homeless people and really see people in need like Jesus did, and hang out with the people that are down and out. And he didn't hang out with the elite at corporations and that sort of thing, and not chasing the American dream up a corporate ladder. So I did that for 14 and a half years, and then God had my sight problem come along, and I think he was there trying to help me keep my eyes focused on him, because I couldn't drive at night, and I was not able to do my job at the shelter the way I needed to. So I ended up stepping down from that job, again with no pension, and not knowing how I was going to really do it, but just trusting that God was going to provide. And 2017, I left the Religious Coalition in December, and 2 years later, Jackie and I bought a place in Florida, and we have a nice snowbird nest down there. And her mother, Isla Jean, is a big part of my life, and it's been a real blessing, because now I have an extended family again, and I feel like I have a mom again, and she just treats me so nice and treats me like a son. And Jackie's 2 brothers, Dick Jones and Larry Jones, treat me like brothers, and their wives treat me so nice. With my stepchildren and grandchildren, I'm just living a great life in my retirement, and I just hope that I can help Adam start a business, and this is probably his first experience at doing what we plan to do, which is defining moments for people, and I'm going to be his partner. So the next chapter of my life will have many more adventures, and I'm just glad to be part of the initial video that he's trying to launch his own business.